On this episode of the show, I have with me June Lee. She is Global Head of People and Culture at 12 Labs. We're going to be talking about the right tools and programs at the right time at your startup. And we're going to talk about the different challenges early stage startups have at different stages. And we're going to talk about some of the big challenges, some of the maybe top 3 or 4 challenges that you typically are facing, what tools and programs June has seen work, solve some of those key problems. And we're going to talk some about the learning lessons about how you go about evaluating tools. June, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for reaching out about this.
Absolutely. I guess one of the hardest things for companies to do is to invest in the right tools, right? Every company has to go through that due diligence process, and a startup, I guess, as any company has to go through that process. But obviously, different stages of startups will have different needs, and you might not want to invest as much as you'd like. So we have a lot of different factors that go into tools and programs and processes. And you've got a great background working at different type of companies. And when we first talked about this topic, we were talking about the right tool, the right program at the right time. I guess if you're a talent or you're a people leader, as you kind of move through different startups at different phases, you get the benefit of seeing all these different ways of solving problems. I always kind of think of it as an art, not a science, of picking the right tools and programs based on the company's need, because you have a big toolbox. I guess as you've kind of gone through, this process with different companies, how do you evaluate when you join a company? Could be a different stage from your previous, could be the same stage. What's your process of evaluating what the tools and programs look like before you even dive in to make changes?
Obviously, as many leaders say, they do a listening tour, or you kind of start logging issues or escalations and see the pattern of like what needs to be addressed. So even when I think about during COVID, when COVID first happened, at scale, you see people are really struggling. When I do my listening tour as HRBP, they're saying I'm having a hard time making connections. So then we're like, okay, we need to build a program around connections. So just really listening to the people, or even listening to your team, where your team is constantly bogged down, spending way too much time on one particular tool issue, then we probably need an upgrade there. So definitely a listening first approach with both your team and your employees as well.
Absolutely. When you kind of look at your toolbox, and I'm an ex-software engineer, and I always refer to the skills you develop as your toolbox. And within the people talent space, you have a toolbox, the skills you've cultivated. And, there are different tools at different stages and different approaches. As you have to kind of normalize that when you join a company and try to make sure that we're right-sizing the program and the tools, I do think that's something of a learned experience, because obviously you can't just pick the same tools no matter what. I guess, how do you kind of evaluate after you've done your listening tour, and obviously you're trying to look in your toolbox and you're trying to adjust for that size, scope, scale of the company you joined? You got to be careful not to go too much or too little, because obviously you might not be solving problems. How do you kind of look at that?
Yeah, it's a lot of factors. We always have to talk to finance, understand what the budget is. We also have to think about, evaluating, in this case, if we want to talk about tools, just not getting a tool just to get it, right? We'll get a ton of BDR messages saying hey, do you want this headcount planning tool? Or do you want this leave tool? I actually don't really look at a lot of those emails, because that's just driven from that side more. Whereas I have to think, okay, now we're having a lot of leaves. We have leaves popping up in different locations, different regulations. I'm ready to look at leaves. So then I will dig into my inbox, look at what I've gotten. I will talk to my HR friends, hear about what tools they really like for leave administration. So I think we have to make sure that we're driving it from ourselves, our budget, our needs, and then collecting the data and going through the evaluation process, which I can talk more about as well.
Absolutely. As you're kind of looking at, those needs, and you're trying to identify, what is the right tool to solve. obviously you can't pick tools to solve every needs. You have to prioritize. You can be too niche in your approach of picking a tool to solve too narrow a problem. And I know automating is something that we're all looking to do. Is there a limit as to kind of when or how far you'd want to pick a granular tool? I mean, you might have a business need and you might find a tool for a very specific business need, but sometimes we might just, hey, listen, the manual way is just better because we'd rather use the budget elsewhere. I guess when you kind of look at evaluating those needs and how narrow you want to start solving problems, and you do have a limited budget and people talent, right? I think that's the other component we're working against. How is there a line in the sand of how a problem can be too small for you?
I would say definitely. So even with something like leaves, like we will handle it manually until it just eats up way too much of our time. Or if you think about like anniversary programs and we're like, okay, this person hit their 1 year anniversary mark, going to send them this particular swag. Hit their 3 year mark, we're going to send this particular swag. All of that can be manual as well, but then at some certain point, we're spending way too much time. And it also depends on like customization. If we want to provide a customized employee experience and a tool helps us do that, I think that's when to do it. Otherwise, if you're like, hey, we can't customize, let's just give standard like X year anniversary gifts, then you can still do that without getting a tool. So it really depends on like the organization need. And that comes like higher up to if like, the CEO says like, hey, I do want things to be customized and like I get the value of this, then we'll get the tool. If we reach to the point where we're sending out like, 5 gifts a week and like it's eating up way too much time. But if you're like a smaller company and you're just doing like one a week, etc., then like it probably wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, you mentioned when you are looking for a tool, you're talking to, people in your network, you're looking at vendors emailing you. I mean, there's just so many options. And depending on the use case, obviously the pre-sales process can go a certain way. You will leverage and talk to, your network. When it does come time to actually looking at features and benefits and trying to understand and evaluate a tool, I guess talk to us a little bit about that evaluation process, because it seems like it's very compressed in talent and people tools. I don't feel like they're as robust as maybe other package software that you can potentially buy. When you go through that evaluation process, like walk us through, you've got some recommendations. What are you looking for? How are you weighing different benefits? And then when you do get a chance to demo or to get a chance to play with the tool, how do you go about putting it through its paces?
I think there's a lot of things I think about when I actually get to the buying a tool phase, right? So, as I mentioned, like talk to my network, talk to a bunch of other head of peoples. You can kind of get a sense of like what is the best in class product or what is like the up and new coming product. I'm actually pretty open to both, just because sometimes like an up and new coming product can actually overtake an existing product, right? Like at some point, Ashby was like this up and coming product, but now is like one of the best in class in the industry. So I like to be open minded about that, because if you have an up and coming product, often they are more customized, more like the CEO is more willing to be involved, but sometimes like they also don't work. So you just have to be cautious in both scenarios. So I keep an open mind in that process. And then going in to actually, coming up with your list of requirements. Does it solve the problem you have at hand right now? Can it scale with you? Can it take it to like 2x, 4x, 6x your current size? If hypothetically, if my company's 100 employees, I want to make sure this can scale me to at least 600 employees. But obviously, like the tool that's used when you're 1,000 employees would just look very different. Because if you think, even for HRISs, a lot of startups use Bamboo HR, and at some point they graduate to Workday, etc. So you can't really, choose the best in class that worked for like 1,000 person. So those are things I think about of how easy is it to implement? Will it integrate with the tools we already have? Thinking about our user experience of like, our employees actually going through it and does it make sense for our company? And I definitely look at bad reviews. So if I hear a bad thing, I will double down on it. And like, usually there's a pattern of the bad reviews, then like they come off of my list. And lastly, if you're not 100% sure, then I definitely try to get a sandbox for each tool that I evaluate just to make sure that like I'm clicking through things work and like they're not saying it works and I go in there and it doesn't work. So those are like just the top things I think about when evaluating tools.
Do you ever start worrying about, or do you ever start what are some technical components you factor in? And I guess from technical, maybe it's about the migration, maybe it's about training. I mean, what are the technical pieces of the actual evaluation, phase? Because obviously, you want to make sure you know all these details before you dive in. What are you looking at during that process in that scope?
Usually, like I understand the problem that I'm dealing with, or maybe my team does. So, like, make sure those people are involved in the process, or someone on the security team may also want to take a look. So, just like involving the right people in during that evaluation phase. Usually, it's not just the decision that I make on my own, right? Like, I'm talking to them, my HR ops person talks to them, make sure they can handle the integration. So, it's a team wide evaluation.
Yeah, I guess maybe, if you're migrating from a tool, I think that might be, as you kind of mentioned, outgrowing tools, they're never clean. I mean, I don't care what any vendor tells you that, oh yeah, we seamlessly move one data from that. That's not true. I mean, never is. I guess when you look at that, I guess there's a technical component to that. And I guess really it's more about the trade-off, right? Is the tool worth the trade-off of what you're going to get in terms of the loss of some data? I guess that's more of a super narrow question. But I guess when you are looking at tools and you're looking at growth in future migrations, I mean, do you look at the fact that you might lose some data in the process, or is it, hey, listen, if the tool's benefits outweigh what we have now, we take that hit?
I actually think we worry about that more than we should, because when we moved from Lever to Ashby, I was genuinely concerned this is going to take forever. We're going to lose a lot of candidate data from the ATS migration, but it literally took us 2 days. Like we hit a button, the data went over, and we just needed to do a lot of cleaning up. I actually think that impedes people from making decisions because they are scared about like everything they're going to lose. But if you have the right team and block off time to download everything and like do what you need to do.
Actually, you made a great point, and maybe I want to touch on that. As you mentioned, we worry about it too much, right? The data we have going into the system. Maybe we don't leverage all that data anyways. Maybe it's more of a mental exercise of, oh, we have this data. We don't want it to, we might not want the historical aspects of that data to be lost in the translation, but we might not be doing enough with it. When you look at the reporting side of it, right? So we want that data obviously for analytics, historical research, reporting. I don't know how often we go back to some of that data anyways. How does that factor into your evaluation process? Because I think in the theoretical world, we all want it because we all worry that we're going to use it someday, but most people don't.
So for some HR tools, it's more straightforward. So maybe if you're moving performance tools, you can download the historic data and you can look at that, right? But if you're looking at something like a recruiting tool where you want to keep tracking pipeline data and you're worried like, hey, if I move it, then I'm going to lose all the pipeline data, at least from the in an early stage startup that's growing really fast, we really care about the last 3 months, the last quarter or the quarter before. So I think we share like, hey, like this was the data we had in Lever, and like this is the current data we are building. And usually there's only about like a 3-month lag, right? If we care about a quarter. And I don't think we're getting like that many data questions within those 3 months. And those are some, like, I feel comfortable being like, hey, we just did a migration and like, this is the data we have. And this is the data we had before. And that usually addresses a lot of the questions.
I like that. I guess, we've been talking about evaluation. I mean, the change management piece, right? The adoption piece, getting people comfortable with tools. I mean, that's really a lot of the success or failure is going to hinge on people, how they're going to use these tools. I guess when you look at, the adoption and actually post go live and training, what are some of the key things you've noticed or seen that help with that change management with that adoption?
Often I would say each tool will say like, hey, we can do a training for your employees. but they're not really considering, what was it like before? What is it now? What are the major changes that employees and managers need to keep in mind? They're just showing their tools, right? They're like, hey, like this is our tool, like here's how you use it. And I think that's why I prefer to do the trainings, myself or with my team, so that we can build it more in house of like, hey, like a typical change management framework. What were we doing before? What are we doing now? And what are the changes? And why are we doing this? Like just being able to answer those 4 questions really clearly is how I would like to roll out every tool that I use.
I like that. And I guess as you and we've been talking about picking the right tools, the right programs, how often do you go back and to evaluate a tool at the stage of company? Because obviously you are growing fast in a lot of startups and things are moving by. Do you make a conscious effort to kind of go back? Is it I wait for the need to rise, or how frequently do you look at systems to see if the tool still fits the time and stage of the company?
That's a good question. In like an ideal world, I would want to do a retro every year. And a lot of these tools may do like a QBR, or like I know Loudest used to do like a QBR with every like quarter that we use them. But I mean, at a high growth startup, when you have like 10 different projects, for me, it's like if it's not broken, don't fix it. But often like things will break more often than you think. So yeah, there's definitely tools I kept. There's tools that like aren't broken, but we got feedback like, oh, this was really difficult, or like we wasted a lot of time during performance reviews. So we're like, okay, like we don't want our managers wasting a ton of time. Like, how can we optimize that? So we'll listen to feedback, or like if it's like broken and we're wasting way too much time, we definitely should upgrade. So that's my philosophy.
I didn't want to make this a episode about AI at all, but I am kind of curious, as we've been talking about looking for different tools for different stage companies, the evaluation. Everybody has some component of AI. I'll reserve my commentary on that for another day and another episode. But as you hear these components of AI, these Gen AI components within products, does that move the needle for you? Are you actively seeking those? Are you looking for, or I guess maybe what are you looking for when you hear? Because I'm sure you're pitched 1,000 times a month that there's a new Gen AI tool that's going to just revolutionize your world.
If they're intentional about it, I am interested. So for instance, if you look at a performance evaluation tool and people are writing feedback and they're like, hey, we don't want bias in the feedback that they write. So we're going to use AI to flag if there are any biased languaging, or like how we can improve the feedback we are giving. Then I'm like, okay, I feel like that comes from like an intentional place, instead of like, hey, we're just going to automate all of your, like, I don't know, like sourcing, like writing, etc. Like I don't really know you can automate a lot of those things. But I think with feedback, with job descriptions, there are like certain things that can benefit from like an AI assistance. So I like those instances. The other ones I still have yet to discover.
And as you're kind of going through, maybe going back a little bit to the beginning of the conversation when we were talking about picking and evaluating the right stage, the right program, when you are looking at those policies and you're looking at some of these tools that do claim to automate and do have some of those AI benefits, what do you need to do from a people and talent leader perspective? And what I'm asking really is, are you looking at re-envisioning the problem with this kind of AI tools, just automating the manual? Because I think there's a lot of things that these tools provide, and I think you do different things with them, but whether or not you're actually tearing down the process to build it up to be AI native, or just addressing problems that the AI can solve. I think there's 2 different ways of approaching this potentially.
Yeah, I have yet to see, like, I think we all use AI to write our job description, build an interview plan, or, write out our questions. But I have yet to see a tool that I'm like, yes, like this overtakes my AI assistant needs. I haven't seen that yet. So I'm curious to when that comes, but right now there hasn't been anything that I'm like, yes, like this is going to be the HR AI solution. And I know we all market it, but it's something like, oh, I could easily go to ChatGPT and then like get that and do it. Like, why would I get this one AI tool? I still have yet to be impressed there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of tools are embedding similar to ChatGPT type features, so it's kind of hard to separate out the value. I think the one thing that's interesting that I observe when we're looking at tools and evaluation is the underlying data that companies need to do some of this stuff. I don't think a lot of times that data governance, data quality are top drivers within the people talent space. I think that's going to be an interesting factor because I think a lot of these tools, as they mature and people migrate to different tools, that's going to come up because that data piece is going to be critical. If we don't have it, you can't obviously, you can't apply a generative tool to data that's not there. So I think it's going to be interesting because I think that's going to come up more as more robust tools do enter the market.
There can be a couple interesting use cases, right? Like if we look at engagement tools and how they already are looking at like demographic data or like performance data and seeing how people perform. Like I'm really curious to like what layer AI could also add on top of that. But I'm also cautious of like what layer will there be biases that come up on top of that. And I know like AI is supposed to help reduce bias, but like, yeah, I would want to like double check and make sure that whatever insights are provided are not just biased recommendation based on like certain demographics or certain words type of say. And there's just so much nuance when it comes to this. So like for right now, I work at a global company where we're both in Korea and San Francisco. So the language can be nuanced in like the way maybe like during an engagement survey, if an American employee wrote something versus like a Korean employee wrote something, it can be interpreted differently. And to what degree will we be biased towards like the standard American language? So I'm really curious to how like language will evolve to suit the global needs as well of our global companies rising. So that would be like an interesting, if they did that, like if they were able to be like, hey, like, we are language native and like can decipher and help different countries of different languages, that would be super interesting tool that I would definitely take a look at.
That's a very interesting use case because I think that probably wouldn't be the hardest thing to plug into almost every single tool and offer that as a feature. And who knows, maybe somebody will hear that and that will be out there before we know it. June, I want to thank you for taking the time and joining us and kind of sharing your thoughts through this process. If somebody does have a follow-up question that they'd like to ask you, how can they touch base with you?
Yeah, they can definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm under June L, but like it'll be on the podcast bio.
Absolutely. We'll make sure that's included for you. Again, thanks for taking the time. Thanks for joining the show.
Well, thank you for your time too. And I really appreciate today.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think we talked a lot with June about looking for tools, evaluating tools, what she looks at from a technical perspective, change management, how she actually evaluates needs within different stage companies and the timing of when to look for a tool. And sometimes if it's not broken, you don't need to fix it was a great tidbit in there as well. Please share this episode with somebody else who could benefit from it. I think it was great content. I'd love for you to share it out. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.